Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the MA Parent Education Series. I'm Simone Kennel, the principal of Menlo Atherton, and I wanted to welcome you this evening because this is our first Parent Ed event of the year, and I believe it's going to be an amazing one. I would like to thank Charlene Margot. Charlene, if you step out for just a minute, who has been coordinating Parent Ed events at MA for many years and brought fabulous quality speakers and programs, as I'm sure you're going to see this evening. And there is support through the Sequoia Union High School District and also our Health and Wellness Department to offer the Parent Ed series across schools in the school district as well. So I'll also by saying Happy New Year or Lashana Tova to anyone who celebrates. My father's probably looking down from above wondering why I'm working on a Jewish holiday, but it's okay. So I did want to pass on that message to anybody who does celebrate. But we're in for a true treat this evening with Lee Daniel Kravetz and Julie Lythcott-haims, who's been here before, as they're going to talk about their books and also Lee Daniel Kravetz's title of his book, Strange Contagion, Inside the Surprising Science of Infectious Behaviors and Viral Emotions and What They Tell Us About Ourselves. And I'm so looking forward to that because in a school of 2,400 teenagers who have a range of emotions every day, and we know what kinds of stress and pressures they face as things with technology and college applications, and everything has changed lives so much. And I'm also really looking forward to that as a parent of a junior myself. And of course, Julie Lythcott-haims, best-selling author of How to Raise an Adult, which I'm sure most people, if not had a chance to read yet, will at some point. So I hope you enjoy this evening, and without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Charlene. Okay, Charlene Margot. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Simone. Thank you, Principal Kennel. It is always a pleasure to have the principal with us today. Makes the events more special, and I know it helps you parents see how important parent education is to this district. I myself am an alumna parent with 2 children who graduated from Menlo Atherton High School, so this place is near and dear to my heart. And when I come back, it makes me happy. And I think about, 12 years ago, we started this program with 25 people in the library. And today, the Parent Education Series, as we know it, is the largest parent education program of its kind in Silicon Valley, with over 40,000 attendees in the last decade. So that's something, right? Okay, so first of all, I want to tell you a little bit about how things are going to go tonight. To start with, we will have our keynote presenter, Lee Daniel Kravetz, and he's going to give about a 30-minute discussion about his new book, what brought him to write it, what he was seeing, and what he thinks that it means for the community. We will then bring out Lee and Julie Lythcott-haims, and they're going to have a little fireside chat here with questions curated by Julie. So you'll have a wonderful opportunity to see 2 of our nation's real thought leaders in education in action. So very excited for that. Then, during that portion of the evening, we will be coming around and offering note cards. If you have any questions that you would like asked of Lee or Julie, please take a note card, write something down, and we'll come back down through the main aisles, a little bit less like southwest, right? And we'll pick up your note cards, and I will be giving the questions to our presenters, okay? Also, as you were coming in, on one more little piece of bookkeeping, you were handed a short survey. If you could fill that out and hand it back at the end of the night, it would be much appreciated. This survey data helps us plan for next year and gives us reporting that I take back to the Sequoia Union High School District and one of our primary funders, the Sequoia Healthcare District, without whose support and generosity this program would not be possible. And to the MAPTA, as always, thank you. I started this program again, as I said, 12 years ago with a $1,000 grant. And here we are today, so pretty good. We're at every high school in the Sequoia Union High School District. As always, you are welcome to attend events throughout the district. They are free, so again, thank you all for coming out tonight. Let's get started. I'm going to begin tonight with a biography, short bio for Julie, since she will be joining Lee, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about Lee, okay? Julie Lythcott-haims is the author of the New York Times best-selling book, How to Raise an Adult. Break free of the overparenting trap and prepare your kid for success. Today, How to Raise an Adult is being published in over 24 countries, and the book gave rise to a TED Talk that became one of the top TED Talks of 2016, as well as to a sequel, which will be out in 2018. In the meantime, her memoir on race, Real American, is due to be published, I think any moment, Julie, October 1st, is that right? Okay, congratulations. Julie Lythcott-haims is a graduate of Stanford University, Harvard Law School, and California College of the Arts. She lives in Silicon Valley with her partner of over 25 years and their 2 teenagers and her mother. Let's just give a nice welcome to Julie. Okay, here we go. My friend, Lee Daniel Kravetz. Lee Kravetz is the best-selling author of Super Survivor and Strange Contagion. His work has been translated into 10 languages. Lee has written for print and television, including the New York Times, Psychology Today, the San Francisco Chronicle, and PBS. Lee has been featured in Time Magazine, the Harvard Business Review, and Fast Company, and he is a founding board member of the Lit Camp Writers Conference. He holds a BA in journalism from the University of Missouri, Columbia, a master's in psychology from Santa Clara University, and received a postgraduate fellowship from Stanford University. Please join me in a very warm welcome for Lee Kravetz.
You got it. Oh, wow. Hi, everyone. It's so funny. I was saying to Charlene earlier that I haven't looked out to so many people since my bar mitzvah, so it's good to see everybody here. Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you, Charlene. Thank you, Julie. And yeah, I'm here to talk. Oh, it's me. I'm here to talk about contagious resilience. Let's see if this works. Okay. So I'm going to start with two things. First, a disclaimer and a promise. And the first one, the disclaimer, is that this is a true story that I'm going to talk about. And this true story has happened to all of us here in this area, in this region, in this part of the world. And then the promise is that by the end of this talk, you will have inadvertently caught resilience. What if I were to tell you that we can catch creativity, we can catch happiness, we can catch boldness, we can catch intelligence, we can catch calm as easily as we can catch the flu? So a couple of years ago, back in 2009, my wife and I moved to Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley, we were really excited about it. She got a job at Google. I was getting my master's degree in counseling psychology. We were about to have our first child, my son Alec. And one of the things we were really excited about moving out here was that Silicon Valley is really, really good at making things that catch. You know, like the Audion tube, self-driving cars, social media, search, state-of-the-art healthcare, education. All of these things are things that have caught all over the world, and they started here or were perfected here. But in 2009, it created something that was never supposed to catch, but did. So in 2009, as many of you know, a student from Gunn High School, which is a local high school here in Palo Alto, very high ranked, some great, really great kids, great programs, great teachers. One of the children, the students, walked in front of a train and died by suicide. And this was a heartbreaking moment. It happened right down the street from where we were living. And we knew teachers at this school. We knew some of the students. And it kind of gave us pause. But then, of course, a couple weeks later, another student did the same thing. And then a couple weeks later, another student and another student and another student. And over the course of, 6 months, there were 5 students who died by suicide on this train track. And there were others who had tried and were pulled off at the last minute. I'm a science writer, and I was getting my master's in counseling psychology at the time, and one of the things I really wanted to answer was, what was causing this? What was causing this? We all had that question on our mind. What was causing this? And it turns out, well, I suspected anyway, that it had something to do with social contagions. Social contagions. Social contagions are contagious thoughts, contagious emotions, and contagious behaviors. Contagious thoughts, contagious emotions, and contagious behaviors. And the thing about social contagions is that we catch them without ever realizing it. That's right, we can be walking down the street and catch a social contagion. We could be standing next to somebody and catch a social contagion that they caught moments, weeks, or even years earlier. We will catch their thoughts, we will catch their emotions, and we will catch their behaviors. And we will act on them as though they are ours. It sounds like science fiction. But it turns out, it's not. We get them for, it happens, we catch them and we spread them for a number of reasons. 2 reasons mainly. Primes, so all of the cues in the environment, the colors on the wall, the color of the carpet, the colors of the clothes we're wearing, the smells that we smell, the sounds we hear, these are all things that cue us, they prime us to act and to feel a certain way. Everything has the potential to cue us, to prime us. The second thing is a biological part of us. It's mirror neurons. There's actually physically a part of our brain that reflects what other people are how they're behaving and how they're feeling, and we will feel and respond the same way, as though it is our emotion, our thought, or our behavior. Even babies have mirror neurons. I mean, think about it. When my son Alec was born, within a couple of days, he was looking up at my wife, and when she was smiling down at him, he would smile back. Experiment, experiment, experiment. Okay, I'm not going to torture you, but what if I were to say, I'm really tired. I got up really early this morning for Rosh Hashanah services, and if I yawned into this microphone right now, most of you would feel that. I see people yawning out there. I see you guys. That's a social contagion. Now, guess what? This happens on a macro level, too. I mean, we will catch aggression, violence, war, revolution, calm. Even the desire to try to become pregnant is a social contagion. They are everywhere. They are inescapable. There is nowhere we can go on earth where we will not catch a social contagion. Oops, sorry about this, guys. Turns out we can actually vaccinate against the bad ones, and we can promote the good ones. And maybe we can use this knowledge, I thought anyway, to try to save the kids in Palo Alto, my new hometown. So, to start, I went to go check out, we went to go check out contagious emotions. I wanted to see, okay, I've read that emotions can be contagious. In some ways, I know that if I'm in a room full of people who are really gloomy, I start to feel kind of gloomy too. And if I'm around people who are really smiling, I start to feel kind of happy. I wonder if what's the science behind this? So I went to Wharton, and I hung out with a professor named Sigal Barsaid, who studies something called companionate love. Companionate love, it's amazing. So basically, she started out, she was looking at hospitals. She was doing a survey of multiple hospitals throughout the country to see which hospitals were really, had, I guess, better statistics than others and what made the difference between them. And she wound up finding that one hospital in particular had really great patient results, meaning patients stayed less time in hospitals than in these other hospitals. And that there was fewer emergency room visits for patients who were there just getting routine procedures done in this hospital than anywhere else. And she started looking into why. And it turns out that at the very, very top, the social workers, the nurses, the doctors, even the people who fielded calls were really kind to one another. They were really, really nice. Like when one nurse was having a really bad day, a coworker would come up and offer a shoulder to cry on. When someone was doing really well, they would celebrate that victory with them. And this was not just like 1 or 2 days. This was like a company culture that had just kind of happened naturally. And that started trickling down because patients who were never privy to any of these interactions started feeling better and cared for too. And not only that, but the loved ones of people who came to visit the people who were in the hospital for treatment were leaving feeling better as well. And they had all these studies to show how that was happening. It trickled down by 3 degrees of separation. It turns out this is called companionate love. And she took this study and she took it to every kind of business she could find. And it turns out that those who were high in companionate love had great results company-wide. Bottom lines were stronger, people were healthier, people were happier. Kindness matters. Emotions are contagious. Okay, so emotions are contagious. Emotions like fear, hysteria, stress, and if you look at some studies, even depression is contagious. Okay, so what about thoughts? Contagious thoughts. I went to go visit the University of Illinois, and this was an amazing trip because I met this guy named Dr. Gary Slutkin. Gary Slutkin used to work for the UN, and what he would do is he would go to all of these countries who are dealing with real epidemics, HIV/AIDS, malaria, Ebola, and his job was to go and monitor for outbreaks. And when there was even just a little sign of an outbreak, he trained people throughout the country to go out and to try and stop the practice that would spread these illnesses. So there would be 1 or 2 people who reported that malaria or Ebola was happening. Let's say Ebola. He would go out, and these interrupters would go into these villages and these communities and teach people very quickly how to treat the body so that the illness doesn't spread, how to treat the water so they don't get water-based illnesses. And this wound up stopping these illnesses in major ways throughout the world. He wound up coming back to Chicago, which is where he was from, and he noticed a pattern. He said that violence in Chicago almost acted like a virus. That if he could go and try to create the same sort of interrupting sort of model, maybe he could try and stop the spread of violence. And so he did. He went out into the city, and he and his team, he now called it the Cure Violence team, would go out and they would actually train gangbangers to how to stop the spread of violence. Social workers, when somebody came into the hospital, they would go in and talk to the people who were more likely to catch the contagion of violence after a friend or a loved one was shot or hurt, and go out and do sort of kind of revenge killings or things like that. And believe it or not, while violence is still very high in Chicago, it brought those numbers tremendously down. And then he started sending these interrupters out into the world. And if you look at Baltimore now, there's some major projects in Baltimore where they've actually brought down contagious violence. And I was like, wow, I wonder if we could use that in Palo Alto. Not so much for violence, but to stop the spread of what's happening to our children. Can we use this model at home to stop other contagions like bad work ethic, burnout, or even greed? I keep coming back to the scary fact, though, that we can catch all of these things without ever knowing it. Hold on 1 second here. Okay, so that was contagious behaviors. Let me back up 1 second here. All right. So those are contagious behaviors. I apologize. Contagious thoughts. Contagious thoughts are just as contagious as behaviors and just as contagious as emotions. I traveled to New York and I meet a professor named Peter Goldweiser at NYU. He's in this lab. He runs this lab called the Motivation Lab, and he's figured out that primes are the things that help us catch different thoughts. So, for instance, he realized that bulimia, now anorexia has been around since the Middle Ages, but bulimia really didn't catch until the late 70s. Why? Well, once it was diagnosed and discovered, it went into the DSM, and then magazines started writing about this new condition, and then television shows started reporting on it as well, and people's figures started getting slimmer and slimmer, and so the idea, the thought of bulimia caught. And in fact, there are places in the world that did not have television, and until they had television, they did not have eating disorders, specifically bulimia. And the minute that they did, and they started watching shows like Friends and 90210 and things like that, eating disorders crept in very, very fast. Turns out that certain cues make us catch other people's motivational thoughts as well, like work ethic, which, we all think that work ethic is a really good thing, especially if we have a really good work ethic, but it can be pushed to the extreme. And if we start working too hard and we start pushing ourselves way too hard, it can cause people to be mentally unwell. Ambition is another thought that we can catch. Like, I need to reach for this star. And it turns out that ambition itself just gets a kind of a bad rap, right? This guy is way too ambitious. This person over here is far too ambitious. But it turns out ambition actually is not a bad thing. It actually is a good thing for us. The problem is, if we are ambitious to a fault, we don't accept failure very well. And so that's a problem as well that we can catch. Economics. I mentioned that economics is a vector. Turns out that even just studying economics, even just learning, like opening up a book about economics, makes us greedier. Okay, so emotions, thoughts, and behaviors are highly contagious. And guess what? You're all now infected. In fact, you've been contagious since the moment you walked in here and I turned on this PowerPoint. It's a neat little effect there. Okay, so remember this image up here? This image has been proven to make you catch anxiety and stress. In this image right here, where we talked about primes and mirror neurons, this is an image and a type of image that primes people for creativity. And this neat little image here, it primes you for focus. And this image right here, it primes you for happiness. Remember this little slide right here? Notice how the calm is a little bit of a different color than everybody else? If you look at this long enough or fast enough, you'll start feeling calm as well. And this little slide that just kept on popping up every once in a while, that was no mistake. You just caught courage. So, the elements of resilience: stress and fear, creativity and focus, happiness and calm and courage. These are all things that contribute to resilience. So how it works. When we see examples of resilience and the elements of it, the reward center of our brain lights up. We become resilient in our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors by simply witnessing the resilience of others. Research shows that our relationship with others matters most when we're trying to spread resilience. Oh, let me back up one more second here. There we go. All right, so how this works. Paradox, that there's a major paradox here. When we're thinking about collectiveness and the collective around us, think instead about yourself. Find your own inner strength, because resilience inspires resilience around us. And Palo Alto has more than anything become a model of resilience for the world. Palo Alto has raced 5 times past the national average when it comes to teen suicide, and yet its resilience, how the town faces and grapples with the loss and how it endures, is a beacon to others in the country, where the suicide rate among teens, girls in particular, recently reached a 40-year high. Another step towards spreading resilience and catching resilience is encouraging self-care. Tell your students, your children, your friends, your coworkers to take time off, to really embrace downtime. I usually tell a lot of my clients just to be lazy every once in a while. It actually can save your life. Encourage students and the people around you to make a gratitude list. Well, I do this with my kids every night. Before we go to bed, we read stories, and my wife and I ask our 2 children, what are you grateful for today? And they always say the same thing over and over again, but it means that it's sinking in. They'll say, I'm grateful for mommy, daddy, the fish, the dog, the cats, my grandparent. It just keeps on going. But every night, they cannot go to sleep until they do a gratitude list. Encourage companionate love. Kindness matters. The science is there to show it. Being kind to one another is one of the most contagious things in the world, and it has major health benefits. Encourage solidarity. Encourage emotional attunement and awareness. All of these things spread and catch. So, finally, how can we bring all of these conclusions home to help our kids, to support one another, to be the village that does it together, to share the gift of knowledge and wellness, to reach teachers by being and acting and showing? It means that the role of a community has never been more vital, to both stop the spread of bad and promote the spread of good. Even though this has been a dark story, I came to learn the power of resilience. True resilience isn't ignoring the hard things, it's embracing and harnessing the good with the bad. In this way, a community becomes the ultimate interrupter, pushing one of the most effective vaccines to fight depression, anxiety, and spread resilience. Thank you so much.
Okay, Lee and Julie.
Okay.
Now we have the fireside chat. Frank Bruni sat in one of those chairs too, I'll let you know, guys. Okay, Aaron, if you would put the backdrop slide back up, thank you. And raise the lights a little. There we go.
Congratulations on this book. Lee is in demand around the country as communities well beyond ours are trying to figure out just what to do in response to behaviors that are tragic and contagious, as we have experienced here in our hometown. I think I want to start by saying kind of who are you? What impelled you toward writing these books? For those who haven't read Super Survivors, Lee's first book, it's really an examination of how people are actually made stronger by adversity, how people actually can emerge from a pretty serious loss or adversity with some superpowers. Mm-hmm. And so when I think about that book and this one, I can only deduce that you're fascinated by the endurance of the human spirit, that you somehow believe in us, and you're interested in what makes us thrive. And so I want to just start by asking, who are you such that that is true? And when did you know that that was true for you and that this would be your life work?
Wow, thank you. Julie, it's awesome being here with you. Julie has
as well.
She has been doing a couple of events with me, and she's wonderful. You guys know that already, though. Can you guys hear me okay with this? Okay, we're going to get real here for a second. So to go back to the very beginning, I was actually living in New York at the time, and I was 28 years old, and I was diagnosed with cancer. It was a pretty scary moment, and I didn't know what was going to happen. But when I was diagnosed with not having cancer anymore, I guess you could say remission, whatever, I was shocked by how people who had similar experiences to me could get up the next day and walk around. And I was absolutely certain that I would never be able to do that. And yet I did. I bounced forward. And so I wound up changing my life dramatically after that. I was working in marketing and PR. I had this kind of moment where I was like, I want to do something that's more kind of helpful in the world. And I wound up going and learning about psychology. And so I was really fascinated with super survivors about how do people bounce back? What's the psychology of how people bounce back? And it turns out that, like, look, I hate to say this, but everybody in this room is going to experience at least one major trauma in your life. At least one. And if we're fortunate enough to survive it, which obviously everyone here has, look, we all experience depression, anxiety, PTSD. Many of us do, experience some of that. But most of us at the same time actually experience something called post-traumatic growth. We actually grow from the experience. So we feel the pain, but we also grow from the experience. Simply put, the grass is greener, the sky is bluer. And we start to ask ourselves, well, since we know that life is short, what are we going to do with this time that we have? And that was Super Survivors. I profile about 14 people who are each going on their life trajectory. They each hit a major trauma, plane crash, fire, illness, you name it, and then woke up the next day or the next week or the next year and said, life is short, what can I do knowing that life is short? Something that's meaningful to me. That became an examination into resilience. Now, after this book came out, I was living in Palo Alto at the time, and I started noticing that the same symptoms that everyone I interviewed for Super Survivors had, it started happening on a collective level. The town of Palo Alto, the region of Silicon Valley, all of us were experiencing vicarious trauma in some way, shape, or form. And I suddenly became really interested. Well, could we take these principles of post-traumatic growth, of bouncing forward, and apply them to the town itself? And it turns out that yes, you can. And just like with Super Survivors, we are all going through this experience right now, and it's horrible and painful and scary and frightening. And at the same time, there's also a great show of resilience. And that's really important because the numbers for suicide are just rising. And if we can become a beacon in some ways for other communities in the world to see how to endure despite what's happening, that can only be a great thing. And that's what became Strange Contagion.
I confess, I read Lee's book because he's my friend. And I read Lee's book because I care, as we all do. I read Lee's book because I'm a mom in Palo Alto with 2 kids at gun. And because I also do a lot of thinking about parents and kids and how humans thrive and so on. So if you've read Lee's book, you know that it reads like a mystery unfolding. He goes on this 6-year journey to basically talk to the experts, a small number of whom he mentioned in his presentation, around the country who have studied various aspects of brain and behavior to figure out what they know, what they know, and what their knowledge can do to contribute to this problem we have here. I confess, as I read your book, I found myself at times experiencing this sort of sinking feeling at the sheer mystery of it all. Because it's like these contagions are things that are in the air all around us. I mean, you just exposed us to a bunch, but we can't see them, and it struck me that they're sort of like dust particles that are always in the air, but you don't see them until a bright light shines on them. So given that we can't see them, given that we're hardly aware that we're being primed, that these things are happening, how is it that we seize some modicum of control or awareness over the negative ones that are in our environment, and I'd like at some point for you to shed some light on what those negative contagions are. How do we sort of become aware of the negatives, become also aware of the positives, so that we can be less at their mercy and a little bit more in charge? I mean, we like that here in Silicon Valley.
I know, right? We do.
Yeah.
We do. That's a great question. I get that a lot. And the truth is, part of this whole thing is just awareness in general, learning about them. Being aware that the thoughts that we're having may actually not be intrinsically our own. The emotions that we're having might not be intrinsically our own. The way that we're behaving might be because we're seeing or sensing or perceiving things, even just subconsciously. That's the key. Even just being aware of it, even if you don't know exactly what it is part of, I guess, the therapy, really, right? The other thing is this: even if you don't know, even if you're completely blind to it, blind to fear or hysteria or burnout or all of these things that are highly, highly contagious, being aware of the positive contagions, just kind of going through your day knowing that you are spreading very positive things and helpful and beneficial things, that is also kind of the antidote to a lot of what's going on. So I'll be a little bit more specific.
Yeah.
Gary Slutkin, he talked about being an interrupter.
Okay, what's that?
An interrupter is the idea that I can go out into this audience right now and tell everyone in this room, guys, okay, what are the signs of depression? The signs of depression are, well, you're not sleeping, you're not eating very well, you don't really want to be social, you feel pretty low, you don't make eye contact. Okay, what about anxiety? Well, the symptoms for anxiety are, well, you feel a tightness in your chest, you worry about the future, you can, there's extreme versions of anxiety like OCD, there's other anxieties that are just constant low-level worrying. Okay, great. Those are the signs and symptoms of depression. What about PTSD? Well, you have flashbacks, nightmares. All of these things, learning about what those are, what they are in ourselves, and what they are more specifically for others, means that when you're walking down the hall, or you're walking down the street, or you're serving somebody a cup of coffee, and they may not make eye contact with you, or they look like they've been upset, or they're ashen, or something's going on, you recognize in them the signs and symptoms of any of these emotions, you can say, okay, I'm going to interrupt this. I can stop this. And it could be just as simple as putting your hand on their shoulder or asking how they're doing. In more extreme cases, it can be, hey, look, why don't we talk? And if this isn't going well, there's a wellness center in our school that's incredible. Why don't you go and talk to someone in the wellness center? And becoming an interrupter is part of becoming aware of these social contagions and our place in stopping them, which is huge, huge, huge.
You know, what I like about that is I think we all feel so helpless, so terribly and completely helpless, no matter how well educated we are and what work we do here in the Valley. These events have made us all just sort of feel incredibly helpless. And what you're saying is, it sounds like, that we actually have, that is maybe perhaps less complex than we think, that interrupting these negative feelings and behaviors and actions that we might perceive another person to be experiencing, that interruption doesn't take a PhD.
Not at all.
It doesn't take expertise. It actually takes something pretty human.
It takes something human. I exaggerate, but I mean this. Like, my ideal would be that everybody in this town becomes an interrupter, meaning the Uber drivers, the cafe baristas, the people who sell you books, the people you run into on the street. I mean, literally everybody is so knowledgeable and steeped in this information about resources that are out there and ways to identify what's happening, and that they key into this sort of kindness that they become interrupters on a massive level. And I think that that's unrealistic, but I also think that that's my great hope.
I love that. Uber drivers become interrupters.
Totally.
Lyft drivers, too. Let's put in a plug for Lyft.
Yeah, definitely Lyft.
I think Many of us struggle with, well, why is this way? Why are we this way? Why is our town this way? What's happening? And we're not alone. You know, I get to go around the country talking about how to raise an adult, and often people will come up to me and whisper, we have the same problems here.
Yep.
And they're whispering because maybe the extent to which a young person has chosen to end their life by suicide is a more private event in that community, and they were able to keep it private, whereas here, it hasn't been private. And so I hear from a lot of people around the country signaling, you know, we too are struggling with higher rates of adolescent suicide, and what can we do? And so then that begs the question, why is it happening in those places? And I think everybody hopes that by the time they get to the end of your book, we'll have an answer, because we want an answer, because we want to stop it. Yeah. And I know it's not that simple. And yet, I would like you to share with us what you've learned based on all the research you've done about, well, what does seem to be the impetus here for an unraveling of a life, of a sense of hope for the future that might then result in a young person making this choice. You know, what we talk about stress all the time in this community, and I have a sense it's not as simple as stress, but can you speak a little bit to that?
Absolutely.
To the why.
The why. Well, that was the big question I had starting out, when I first started this book about 6 years ago, was why? Why here? What's going on? And it turns out, you're right, it's not just one thing. And stress is a cop-out. We all know that. But it's a cop-out only in that there are so many other things that are contributing to it. Stress is definitely a component.
And stress isn't inherently bad, though.
Stress can be good.
Right.
Stress can be good. It can push us toward a healthy work ethic. It actually helps us with innovation. And you could say many of the great things that Silicon Valley has accomplished has to do with the level of stress. Although it's we're able to manage it, right? But young kids with still developing brains, it's a lot harder. Stress, I call stress a gateway. Stress is a gateway. When you're stressed, it kind of makes us vulnerable to every emotion that's out there. Mm. Think of it this way. When you're stressed, you get sick easier. It's the same sort of thing, right? So when you're stressed, you are more vulnerable to picking up anxiety, to picking up modes of depression. Any sort of emotion that's out there, you are more vulnerable to it and more susceptible to it. But there's other things as well. Look, why here? There's an element of greed. I spoke to kids, not just from Gunn, but from high schools all over the Bay Area. And in a wonderful way, I had one student come up to me and tell me that she's working on a social media platform that she hopes will beat or plans to beat Facebook at some point. And another person I spoke to said that he was building a battery in this garage with his brother that he was going to sell to Tesla and make a bunch of money on. Now these are great, stories, and the innovation and the ambition is wonderful. These are creative, wonderful, bright kids. And at the same time, to a person, while in the corner of their mouth they're saying it's something I want to do because it's innovative and exciting, on the other hand, it's also with this sort of spoken or unspoken belief that they want to get rich quick, that they want to be like their friends who have these big houses, that can retire young. And when I hear those sorts of stories, I realize that there's an element of greed, and greed is highly, highly contagious. And greed can push us toward good things and bad things. And sometimes, I'm not saying that that's what happened with these students who died, but that's an element that can, in some people, in some cases, chip away, especially, and I should say, okay, with all these social contagions being what they are, the fundamental base where we always start with, is that every student has some sort of, it starts with mental illness. So if you have mental illness on top of greed or on top of pressure, on top of contagious fear, contagious hysteria, contagious burnout, all of these things can contribute to somebody who's not mentally well and can, in part lead to, suicidal thinking and in some cases suicidal actions. So this area is just really concentrated when it comes to these sorts of contagions. Like I said, burnout, greed, fear, hysteria, and ambition. All of these things can be good, but can also be pretty bad and dangerous.
You know, the reason I know Charlene Margot, our wonderful host, is, well, I know her going back a while, but we served on the board of Challenge Success together, which is a marvelous organization. You all know it, founded by Denise Pope and Jim LaBelle and Madeline Levine, and she's the board chair right now. And, you know, I think the whole purpose of that organization is literally to live up to its name, Challenge Success. And I wonder the extent to which our notion of what success feels like, looks like, tastes like, it smells like here, you know, is our definition of success too narrow? Is that a contributing factor here to?
Yeah, I mean, you and I can talk about this sort of stuff every once in a while too, about success and what it means to be successful. Look, I mean, there's nothing more vulnerable. This is a personal story. There's nothing more vulnerable for a writer to go out and put his or her ideas on the line and go out there and talk publicly in the world. And the hardest parts, you know, you get good reviews and you get some bad reviews. And sometimes these bad reviews are pretty public. And my friends in the writing world tell me, don't ever read reviews. Don't ever read reviews. Yeah. But you do, because, you know, you're human. And so I read a review fairly recently that was pretty brutal, and I was like, who the heck is this guy who wrote it? Oh, wait, he's a Harvard guy, okay. But that doesn't mean anything. He just misunderstood it. Oh, wait, he's won a Nobel Prize. Okay, fine. So I felt really, really, really bad. But then I started thinking to myself, like, look.
I'm sorry that happened to you, Lee.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I need some love. Thank you for the kindness. Companionate love. I'm doing okay. How
am I doing? Am I doing okay?
Yeah, doing okay.
Is the
You're
interrupter?
Good. I'm feeling good. I'm feeling the love. Bring it on.
Okay.
So I felt pretty bad, but then I started thinking to myself, like, isn't this what the kids in my neighborhood were going through, right? There's this expectation, and we're all like this in some way, right? That there's this expectation that we have to be successful, that we have to reach this sort of arbitrary but commonly accepted level of success. For me as a writer, I'm like, I want to be a New York Times best-selling author, and if I don't get there, I'm a failure. Or, you know, but, you know, here I am, I'm a 40-year-old adult, and I can deal with that setback, those sorts of failures, right? And I can process them in a different way. But if I'm 14 or 15 years old, my prefrontal cortex isn't kicked in, and all of these sorts of experiences that shape the adult mind haven't been experienced yet, that sense of failure, i.e., I didn't do so well in my exam, I didn't get into the school I wanted, all my friends are doing better than me, my parents expect X, Y, and Z, and I'm just nowhere near that good. All those thoughts can start to chip away. So your definition of success really matters. And I'll tell you, Gunn High School was doing something, I don't know if they still are, it was doing something really fascinating that I was super excited to see. They have this wall, I'm going to get it wrong now. It's not the wall of failure.
Rejections?
Wall of rejections.
The college rejections?
Which was really cool. You walk into this school and there's this whole wall outside with rejection notes. I'm like, that is badass. That's the way to go. Because, look, you're going to succeed at something in life. Hopefully it's something that you enjoy doing. And if you are applying to schools and you're not getting in, and that doesn't mean you are a failure in life. It means that there's other ways to pivot, to change, to go after the things that are intrinsically true to yourself. And that, in my mind, is much, when we talk about success, psychologically speaking, wellness speaking, that is a good thing. I see you looking at me funny.
Yeah, I'm looking at you funny because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, with respect to the larger issue, the medical professionals in our community and mental health professionals will say, do not talk about this subject we're talking about. Okay? Because it increases the problem to talk about it. We're going to talk about that a little bit, that issue a little bit more in a sec. Yeah. But I'm seeing the parallel. Like, what wisdom is there in throwing all this rejection up on the wall? Doesn't that make kids feel worse? Might the companion to the don't talk about suicide be, don't talk about your rejections. Don't talk about all these terrible failures you've had. Now, why is that? Yeah. Why does that actually serve to create the positive contagion of we're all in this, we all fail, life goes on? Why is it a positive as opposed to a negative contagion?
That's a great point. And there's a nuance there, right? There is. If I start to see that everybody else is human, that they have failings too. I mean, if I'm surrounded by people who are primes of success, right? Okay, let me just give an example. Driving through this neighborhood to get here tonight, and I used to live around here, so I know this. These houses here are beautiful. They're gorgeous. And I also know how much they cost. And I also know that in the areas of Palo Alto where the houses aren't so big and beautiful, we all know how much those guys cost too. And so if I'm driving around and I'm like, oh my gosh, there are so many people that are so successful here, and I got to be successful too, otherwise I'm never going to buy a house out here, and I can't meet that level of success. Wow, you're going to start to feel like you're outnumbered, and there's something wrong with you. But in reality, there are a lot of people who don't make that kind of money. And there are a lot of people that aren't CEOs of major corporations, and there are a lot of people that don't go to Ivy League schools, and there are a lot of people that live in apartments or live in smaller homes or commute in who don't live this way and don't expect to live this way. And if we can start to see that, we start to feel like we're not so much alone, and we start to realize that we're kind of in this sort of isolated bubble in some ways. So to see other people who fail, because I guarantee everyone in this room and everybody in Palo Alto and everyone in Silicon Valley has failed. And in fact, I encourage failure. I think failure is awesome because I want everyone to shout from the top of their lungs, yeah, I failed, and it's okay.
You know, now you're channeling Madeline Levine, who I've heard, you know, on this stage and other stages make that very point, that our kids, tend not to realize that our trajectory was not like this. You know, they think it was like this, when in fact, for most, I'd wager all of us, we've had some, you know, downturns and some U-turns and some errors and flailing and floundering and fumbling and so on. And so if we can let our kids in on the fact that, no, mommy and daddy's life hasn't just been, you know, this amazing upward trajectory to success, that we've struggled and we've stumbled, and actually maybe that's why, you know, a new window, a new door, a new opportunity opened for us, that we can be role models for our kids about the fact that people not only experience failure, but we survive it, and it actually makes us stronger in some ways.
It does. We bounce forward, we change,
yeah.
and that's life, right?
Okay.
We all experience
So is that one way of being an interrupter in the life of our kids?
Oh my gosh, without a doubt. Be out there, talk about how you failed.
Just,
show it.
Stand in the driveway and tell your kid that
yeah,
you
pretty
failed?
much stand in the driveway with the tattoo.
When would you drop that lesson into the life of, say, a high schooler?
Well, let's say you have a bad day at work. Don't be afraid. Don't hold that in. If you are personally stressed or sad or depressed or not feeling very good, tell people. Tell your family. Let them see this. The more that they can be exposed to it, the more they'll catch it. And they're not going to catch failing. You can't catch failure. It doesn't really work that way. Otherwise, the opposite would be true too. You could catch success. I would just hang out with all my really successful friends who are much more popular and famous than I will ever be, and I'll catch it. It just doesn't work that way. It's learning how to, you can catch how to respond to the failings.
Yeah.
You can catch how to respond to success. And that's what you want to do. So just don't be afraid. Don't hide it. Your kids need to see this stuff.
So we were playing a little bit. I was playing a little bit when you talked about the bad reviews, and I'm Lee, I'm so sorry, how are you doing? And I was actually being funny. And then I realized, no, wait, I'm actually demonstrating, though I was being humorous, what we all need to do. And so let's get to some specifics, because I'm guessing that everyone who decided to come to this event tonight really wants to know what to do. And so you've used this term interrupter. You've said it can be an Uber driver, it can be a barista, it can be a parent, it can be an educator, it can be a peer. What are some specifics that we can do? You threw up some terms up here like self-care, gratitude, talk, companionable love. Can you walk us through a dialogue?
Sure.
An example in the house, an example in school, where you're going to demonstrate for us what the interrupter sees and what they do.
Okay. This is a great test. So let me see if I can walk through this. So I'll start this conversation by saying there was a man that I interviewed. He's an amazing guy. He's a teacher at Gunn High School. His name is Roni Habib.
Big shout out to Roni Habib, positive psychology teacher and econ teacher at Gunn. Great guy.
He's a great guy. And I would say about 8 of the students who died from the school went through his classroom. And so when I first met him, I said, I think at this point 4 or 5 students had passed away. And I said, Roni, I'm so sorry. We have kids the same age. And I was like, I'm so sorry. How are you dealing with this? And he said, I'll be honest with you. I should have been able to see this. And I didn't. I mean, these are classrooms of 20 kids. I should have been able to see that there was something wrong. I knew these kids. And I missed it, every single one of them. And he was feeling heartbroken and crushed. And what he did was he started, so he taught economics, and I broke it to him later that you're teaching greed, congratulations. And he was like, yeah. So he pivoted a little bit, and he started, when he was doing econ, he started doing this positive psychology course. Well, basically, it was a little test that he did with his students. He sat down, and he said, okay, kids, come on in, sit down. Okay, we're going to do 5 minutes of silent meditation before we go into the econ lesson today. And there was a collective, what? Silent meditation? This is really hippy-dippy. What the heck is this all about? We're just going to do it. 5 minutes of silent meditation. Everyone sit here quietly. Think about what you're feeling. Think about where you are. Think about your thoughts. Be in the moment. He did this every day for a couple of weeks. And by the end, the kids couldn't, they loved it. They couldn't stop doing it. When Roni wasn't even in the classroom yet, he would come in and they would be doing their 5 minutes of silent meditation. And it turns out that just those 5 minutes alone helped calm. I mean, it was kind of not an empirical study, but it was definitely like he sensed it. There was a sense of happiness and calm that he had never experienced. And by the way, Roni went to this school as a student before he became a teacher, so he's been there a long time. He's like, I've never seen this sense of well-being. And then he offered a positive psychology course that filled up immediately. And now he started this whole program. It's called EQ Schools. And it's all about teaching teachers and educators and social workers how to use positive psychology to help students become aware of their own emotions and their own thoughts. Because here's the thing. A lot of Roni's students, this is what he said to me anyway, were not aware of their own emotions. They're really, really, really bright kids, but they never learned the language of emotion. So just sitting there and learning that when your palms get sweaty, that means you're stressed. When you're not sleeping, that means there's a problem. When you're not eating, there's a major problem. When you are studying 90% of the time and not taking time out for yourself, that is a major problem. So we started teaching people the language of emotion. And I'm not sure if there's a correlation or not, but I will say that at the same time, a couple of years later, the wellness program at Gunn High School they're putting a whole facility in, and they're putting a lot of effort into kind of, making kids aware that this wellness program is there. And I believe it was something like several thousand kids, appointments have been made in the course of 1 year just to see this, to go in for the wellness program there, which is an amazing thing if you consider that only, 2,000 kids at the school.
And why is the wellness program a good, what is it? What does it do? I know the answer because my kids go there.
Yes. Well, what does it do? So, okay, you walk in, you're feeling stressed, you sit down, someone's there to say, hey, you know what? Looks like you're not doing real well. Why don't you go over to this quiet area over here and just kind of relax and chill. You can talk to a counselor here. And I'll tell you...
soft seating.
What's that?
There's soft seating.
Soft seating,
tea,
lights, right? That's really
lights,
chill.
yeah,
It takes you out.
It's chill.
And I'll tell you, what's really amazing is that, 4 dozen students from Gunn High School were 5150, I believe, last year. And I tell you, that sounds like a big number, but don't freak out. What's amazing is that the students caught themselves, and they basically walked into the wellness center and said, hey, look, I'm suffering. I need some help. This means that it's working. And that to me was remarkable. So just as a case study,
okay.
Watch, it's incredible.
Okay. I'm going to share one anecdote from my own life, then I'm going to go to your great questions. My son Sawyer graduated Gunn in May, and had Mr. Habib for positive psychology. Mr. Roney in, I guess, is it a year-long class? Semester. So he must have had it spring semester. Yeah. And of course, what was my son doing in spring semester? He was getting into college, applying to and getting into college. And he was admitted to some colleges, and my husband and I were so worried because Sawyer seemed incapable of making a decision. And it was like he was at this point. He had jumped through the hurdles, and he had his rejection letters, but he also had some acceptance letters. And our kid, who's incredibly bright and hardworking, et cetera, couldn't make a decision. And we were worried, and so we started to talk with him about, you make a matrix, and you have all your variables of the issues, and, right? You know where this is going. And all the schools, and you mark it off. And we were leaning in closer to Sawyer and checking in on with him every day about how's it going. That deadline is May 1st. And he was just he didn't want to talk to us. He would fall asleep when we started talking about it. And finally we said, we need to get him some therapy. I can't believe I'm saying this out loud, but it's true. We need to get him to talk to somebody. He's not talking to us. He's not, he needs to go meet with somebody to unpack all of this anxiety. I know, it's so obvious in hindsight. But wait for it, because the moment is really Sawyer's to tell, and he's about to. So late one night, he comes home from a date. It's 1 a.m. He comes home. I'm up late drinking wine. My husband is asleep. And we have some of our best mother-son talks late at night. So he comes over, tells me about, his day or whatever. And then he puts his arm on my shoulder. And he looks me in the eye and he says, Mom, because maybe I said, college, wow, it's April 17th, you got another 13 days to decide, He puts his arm on my shoulder and he says, Mom, I have a lot of anxiety about this process. I said, I know, honey, I can see it, and Dad and I really want to support you, and, that's why we're sending you to Dr. Alper, and that's why we think you should make the matrix. And my son smiles, and then he says, Mom, I think the root of my anxiety is you guys. And I'm thinking, not me, I wrote that book. I couldn't possibly be the source of any troubles you're having, my son. And I'm not saying everyone's anxiety is a function of their parents. What I'm saying is, through Mr. Habib's positive psychology class, my son had learned to be more in touch with the emotions he was feeling and to be able to articulate them out loud, even to a parent like me. So my task in that moment was not to be defensive, and I wasn't. I buttoned all the defensive thoughts I was having. You don't understand. No, we're not. This is all for your own good. I didn't say any of that. I just looked at him and I said, wow, Sawyer, that must have been hard to say to someone like me. And I'm glad you did, and I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. And Dad and I love you, and this is your decision to make, and we know you're capable of making the decision. And we backed our energy off, and Sawyer brought his energy forward, and he made a decision that he was overjoyed about in less than a week, well before the deadline. So I just share this to talk about the value of that. He was empowered through the positive psychology class to speak up in his own behalf.
It's amazing, right? Because you've got one person who was able to spread all of these sort of interrupting sort of words and the behaviors that we need to identify what the issues are. Yeah. Your son is amazing. Sawyer came up to you and said, and articulated, I'm feeling stressed. This is the source of my stress. And he did okay.
Yeah, he did. It was beautiful. All right, to your good questions. My daughter likes to listen to her friends' problems and be supportive, but sometimes she gets overwhelmed by their problems. It is not helpful for her to be her friend's psychologist. Is it not helpful for her to be her friend's psychologist because she's catching their anxiety, depression, and insecurity? Speak to the contagion there, but also speak to what's a kid supposed to do. Because if you're going to pay attention to your friends, you're going to hear about their problems. So where's the line? And when does a kid get overwhelmed by that and have to go seek out other interrupters to help?
Without a doubt. So one, it's an individual thing. So it's a great question. It's an individual thing. So we each have a threshold. And sometimes hearing our friends go on and on and on might be too much. So it really is kind of an independent thing, right? A subjective thing. At the same time, listening and reflecting, it's never a bad thing, right? It's never a bad thing until it becomes a problem. I'm a therapist 3 days a week or 2 days a week, and I sit there all the time, and I'm talking to people and listening to people, and if I were going to catch their what they were giving me, and not being able to contain it, I would have to say something. I'm trained in this, and the problem is kids aren't. They're not really trained to do this. So, frankly, listening, and I mean, this is going to be a convoluted answer because it is subjective, but I do think that to the extent that someone can be there for you and know that they're there to hear you, that's enough. That's enough for them to get some sort of benefit from that. But in terms of like the your daughter who's kind of listening to all this, will she catch the bad stuff? I think she's going to catch it anyway. She's going to catch it anyway from all of her friends, and she gets it all the time.
Okay, but that's terrifying for parents to hear.
It is. It is. But the good news is she's also catching really great things. She's catching happiness. She's catching hope. She's catching resilience. She's catching, joy.
But what do we need to do to be sure that the dial on happiness and resilience and joy is higher than the dial on the negative contagions they're catching?
There's not much you can do. I mean, the truth is, you can. Look, there are ways to become happier people, but it's not like if there was a cure, right? If I could say go to Gun High School or go to this high school here and start piping in happy music every morning, it would make you a little bit happier. But there's no guarantee that it would carry on for massive amounts of time. It's short-lived and things like that. And the good thing about these social contagions is most of the time they really are short-lived. It's not like I'll catch depression or anxiety and it'll carry me through forever. It's usually like a spike, like a small sort of like, oh, I'm feeling kind of sad, and then you move on. Usually they sort of counterbalance one another. And so look, here's the thing. I tell a lot of my clients this too. If you're feeling sad and you can articulate that you're feeling sad, there are things you can do to make yourself feel better. Literally standing up and walking around, watching a funny movie, listening to happy music. I talk about this in the book. Listening to, these sorts of things. Once you can identify that you are feeling bad, feeling low, feeling anxious, that's half the battle right there. Then there are things you can do to kind of change that around. And that's really that's how to do it.
To a point you just made, I want to get you to clarify here. This question writer wrote, doctors and psychologists say that anxiety and depression are mental health issues and not contagions. What do you say to them?
Oh, they're totally wrong. No, I was kidding. No, so look, mental illness is not contagious. That is true. But symptoms of mental illness are. So,
what do you mean?
So, for instance, depression itself, if I'm clinically depressed, I'm not going to make you clinically depressed. It doesn't work that way. But the symptoms, like if I'm like, let me do another one. It's a little bit easier to explain. If I'm chronically anxious, okay? Chronically anxious, you're not going to catch my chronic anxiety. But if I'm biting my nails, you're going to feel a pull to bite your nails too. It's the same way, like if you're not really tired, but I yawn, you'll catch my symptom, right? I won't make you tired, but you'll start to feel that yawn. So you can catch symptoms of mental illness, not necessarily the mental illness itself. In terms of depression, this is kind of an interesting thing. So symptoms of depression are highly contagious, but one of the self-selecting things about depression is that if you're depressed, you don't leave the house all that much. So you're not going to spread what you have. And you're not going to, right? So it's a sort of weird cycle. So that's why depression's a really interesting one. When it comes to anxiety or fear or hysteria, all of those symptoms are things that we can pick up and we do all the time.
Someone here has raised social media. With increased teen use of phones, social media, texting, does that reduce their ability to read face-to-face cues in order to be an effective interrupter?
Yes, it does. That's one of the great things about the programs, that the social emotional learning programs. You start to register, like when I'm looking down, what that means. In some ways, we almost have to be taught these sorts of things, and that's not a bad thing. We just have to learn this, and that's why we have to spell it out for people. I do want to talk about social media a little bit, though, because it is a double-edged sword. Okay, so social media in general, this is a little off topic of the question, but social media in general is both a contributor to the problem and to the solution of contagious social contagions. So Facebook and Twitter both did studies that showed that if I'm putting like kind of a negative post up and I'm just reading it, the odds are that I'm going to post something negative as well. And if I post something happy, if someone else posts something happy and I see it, then my next post will be happy as well. There's some nuance in there, but the gist of it is that what you see is what you receive. You can actually catch emotions and thoughts, even behaviors, via social media. And that's good, and it can also be bad. I'm going to back up a little bit. When there are when children die by suicide, or anybody dies by suicide, one of the things we're not supposed to do is memorialize them. We're not supposed to gather and do a big memorial for the student who died, because we don't want to we don't memorialize them in that way. We don't want to make them kind of icons for people who might actually want to emulate that behavior to get that attention or anything like that. We can regulate that. We can say, we're not going to do a memorial here. It's going to be a private ceremony. We're not going to do these sorts of things. Social media, you can't regulate that. So kids are going on, and they're doing private Facebook chats, and they're doing all sorts of things that sort of memorialize the students who die. That's scary, because that does perpetuate the same sort of contagion. But at the same time, there's studies that show that people spread support and hope and help and resilience all through social media as well. So it's a tool that we can use to spread. Basically, social media becomes the good stuff piggybacks on top of it.
I think we're not light years, probably a decade away from understanding the impact social media will have had on our developing psyche, character, opinions. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, I see people that have a real support network all online.
Sure.
I really do.
Yeah. But there's the performative aspect of it. So you see a happy post, and you post a happy post. Does that mean you're happy, or does that mean you think you're supposed to act happy?
Yeah, I don't know that much. It's funny. I just got on Twitter a few weeks ago for the first time, or a few months ago, and I still don't quite understand it. So ask me in about a decade. Maybe I'll figure it out.
But let me take that question one step further. If you post something happy, and I feel, well, gee, I have to look happy too. Lee's life is great. I want people to think my life is great. I'm going to go and kind of manufacture a happy post. Does that help me?
Gosh, that's a tough one. I'm not sure. I will tell you that that question, it's less of a contagion, I'll tell you that much, because you're consciously making a choice in that scenario. Social contagions have this remarkable ability to catch like on an unconscious, non-conscious level. And that's really where social media is kind of harmful and also beneficial at the same time. That said, the phrase "fake it till you make it," there's actually something to that. If I ask you just to smile, there's something that in our biology that actually makes us feel better. Maybe it's not permanent, but it actually does help. It's why when you listen to happy music when you're feeling sad, it actually helps.
I think this is a related question. It's hard to digest the questions and listen to you and try to be a good. Right, I'm doing.
You're doing a great job.
Right, thank you.
Great job.
Thank you. Okay, you infected us using photos.
Yes.
Like those psychologists use in tests, but the suicides, the violence, and the cures were spread in 3D real life. Isn't real life more effective? Isn't the internet only good at spreading alarm and anxiety and less good at creating resilience? I feel like that's a follow-on to what we were just talking about.
Well, 3D versus what you see. The thing is, everything in life is 3D. Those pictures were just examples, obviously, but if you see somebody, I'll talk about the positive. If you see somebody smile in real life, you feel that as well. Anxiety, depression, those sorts of symptoms, you start to see those in real life, and you will feel those as well. Everything, literally, what I learned from the Motivation Lab at NYU is that literally everything around us cues us and primes us. There is nothing around us that doesn't register and convince us in some way to act or believe or behave or to feel or to think in a certain way. And the reason behind that is our minds are funny. We are all, basically the science is, the math goes like this. If you've thought about it, if you have the capacity to think about it, if it's crossed your mind and is registered in any way, shape, or form at any point in your life, something can register, it can cue you, can prime you. So you say things like suicide. Okay, so Lee, are you saying that suicide, people are primed to hurt themselves? Actually, yes. There is a part of almost everybody around us, everybody here, at some way, shape, or form, has, hurt themselves, cried, made themselves feel bad. There's something within our psyche where we do actually harm ourselves, and it's usually not to the extent of harming ourselves to that extreme, but we are sort of wired in some ways for self-harm, not dramatic self-harm, but to shoot ourselves in the foot, so to speak, in meetings, for cycles of violence and things like that, where we kind of repeat these behaviors that are not necessarily good for us, they're actually harmful for us. Well, if you see something like that, then it's going to cue you, and you're going to feel it. People who catch the idea that they want to become parents, for instance, there's something in their minds where they at some point flashed and they said, yeah, I want to be a parent someday. So all of a sudden they start seeing people in the office who are suddenly going to be parents. All of a sudden you're going to be cued or primed to want to become a parent as well. So as long as we have like the notion in our minds, we are vulnerable to those cues. 3D or 2D, it doesn't really matter.
So the internet is here to stay, and social media seems to be as well. Within the present context of these relatively new ways of being around other humans, ways of getting information and sharing information, we have to try to address this problem that exists in our community and in others. So this question really gets at the specifics of what's Palo Alto doing? What strategies is Palo Alto using to influence contagious emotions, thought, and behaviors, and to what effect relating to the teen suicide rate? So you've spoken of the wellness program at Gunn. That's one example of something concrete a school's trying to do to make to spread positive contagions rather than negative.
So this is, I think the best way to talk about this is to tell you a story about what just happened a couple weeks ago. I'll start off by saying, well, one thing we can do about it is to talk about it, to be open and honest about what's going on here.
That's not a very popular opinion.
It's not. And here's proof in the pudding. I did a talk in Palo Alto a couple weeks ago, and unfortunately, about 3 days before, a student had died by suicide at Gunn. And all well-intended people started calling me saying, you've got to cancel your reading. You've got to cancel your reading.
You were at Books Inc.
I was at
in
Books
Town and
Inc.
Country in Palo Alto.
Right across the street from Palo
with a set
High.
of other authors. So
That's
you
correct.
were going to be one of a group speaking, reading from your books.
That's exactly right.
And you were called by folks who said, do not read.
Do not read.
You will be creating more harm than good.
This community is vulnerable, it's hurting right now, and you will be spreading bad things and not good things. And here's the thing, I caved. I caved instantly. I was like, you're right. You're absolutely right. I don't want to harm the community. I love this community. I write about it. I care deeply about it. You're right. And I bent over backwards, and 24 hours before the event, I decided to change the program. I was going to read from my original book, Super Survivors, and not Strange Contagion. And then afterwards, people who had called me, and people from the institutions that had called me, came up and thanked me profusely. Thank you so much, Lee, for not reading. It means so much. And I felt sick. I felt absolutely terrible, and I was a pill the entire next day, and my family was like, what is wrong with you? And it dawned on me like what it was. I'd fallen into the trap. I'd fallen into the fear trap, the contagious fear trap. And by the way, everyone who asked me not to read, their heart was in the right place. I get it. I mean, boy, do I get it. We are freaked out. We are scared. But I missed a major opportunity. We needed to get up and use this little platform that I have to talk about what had just happened, to talk about the things that we can do to influence this in a positive way, and to stay together as a community, as well as to address the stuff that's really scary and ugly and nasty, but to do it in a responsible way. So the big takeaway, in my mind, is we have to talk about it.
So what would you have done if you could go back and do it now? Now here you are upset that you had caved, as you put it.
Yeah.
If you could go back and do the Books Inc. event again, 3 days after a student died by suicide, what are the concrete things you would have said to those gathered that can be done in order to prevent future tragedies?
Well, okay, so it's not as simple as here's a recipe, but here's what I would say. I would say, listen. Don't talk as much, just listen. Listen to what the students have to say. Listen to what the parents and the community has to say. Don't talk, just listen. Acknowledge. Acknowledge the pain, acknowledge the fear, acknowledge the hysteria, acknowledge. Show resilience, show strength, because by showing it, other people will start to emulate it. Be open and honest. I would say, yeah, I'm scared. I'm terrified about what's happening, and it's okay. This is part of the process. Hear people. Don't be afraid to, basically talking about this actually helps people learn the language of emotion. Engage in the wellness programs. Really engage in it. Latch on to the programs that are already in place to identify the students that are suffering, as well as just to reinforce what the new programs are and the resources out there. All of these things start to kind of play into the idea of how to become an interrupter, basically. I want to make sure I'm not missing anything here, because I made some notes here. So talk about it, but talk about it carefully. There's certain words that we're not really supposed to use for good reason that are, we don't say committed suicide, we say died by suicide. When there's, responsible media coverage, don't put it in headlines. You put put the word suicide in headlines, put suicide awareness hotline numbers at the bottom, bury the story in the paper, don't put it on the front page. Those are the sorts of things that I would encourage people to do that have concrete effects on stopping the spread of this sort of thing. Use social media proactively. So Facebook, Twitter, and Google have been really good about this. Anytime somebody types in the word suicide now or anything like that, ads pop up saying, call this number if you're feeling low. Call this number if you need help. Use social media in a very proactive way. It does help. Wellness spaces. Create wellness spaces for people to go and to process, to be among community, strong community, and people who could help them. Also, I'd say celebrate failure. Really celebrate failure, because we can change the attitude around failure. All of these things really matter, and they can stop these contagions.
Thank you, Lee. I think we are at 8:30, and I want to be respectful of, there's Charlene coming out. Okay, one more thing I got to say, which is just to try to sum up what I've learned and maybe what we've heard. This is overwhelming. This is, in some respects, terrifying. And yet we are not helpless. And we have a lot of power within ourselves, it sounds like, to be there for one another. And it doesn't take expertise, but it does take the willingness to see other humans and their struggle and maybe share a little bit of our own. It sounds like we are craving to be noticed and seen, to know someone cares. And I suppose that's a magical power we all possess, is the ability to be that person in the lives of others.
So yes, without a doubt. And I do want to say the fact that people are all here right now, community is, I think, the biggest form of an interrupter, period. Everybody in this room is now, sort of infused with an idea, how to watch out for one another, to be there for one another. This is the power. This is what is going to stop it, is this community.
I'll make a final plug for positive psychology. Gunn High School was wise to adopt that class, and Roni Habib to create that class, to allow Roni to create it and teach it there. First class of positive psychology in the country, I'm told.
It is, high school, yeah.
And so there's plenty of opportunity to offer more positive psychology courses in our community and well beyond. I've witnessed firsthand that it does make a difference in the life of a child.
I do, and I also just, last thing I want to say that, for those who worry that this is a story about Gunn High School and it's a scary story, in my mind, there are scary elements to it, but Gunn High School, in my mind, and the town of Palo Alto in general, truly has become a great example of resilience.
You call it a beacon of hope.
It is a beacon of hope, and I'll tell you, people look at Palo Alto, we all worry that the story's going to get out and make us look terrible. The fact is, because we are Palo Alto, because we are Silicon Valley, people are looking to us as a beacon of hope, and we are spreading some really great stuff out there. So hopefully this is something that does catch, as well as, you know, the hoodie sweatshirts and the t-shirts and things like that. So
All right. Thank you so much, Lee.
thank you, Julie.
And I just want to say, in addition to a huge thank you to Lee and Julie, that I started the Parent Education Series to provide you, the parents, with the education, skills, strategies, and tools you needed to talk to your kids. So tonight, more than any other night, your homework is to go home and just say to your kids, I heard something tonight, and I want to ask you what you think. And that's why we're here together. So thank you for coming tonight, everybody.